A man leaves his wife for another woman, only to be betrayed the same way. From the outside, Nathaniel Carter's life looked like the embodiment of success. He had a stable job at a growing firm, a modest but comfortable house, and a loving wife, Clara, who had stood by him for nearly a decade. Neighbors admired how devoted she was, often watching her wait on the porch with a warm smile when Nathaniel returned home from work. Friends envied the stability of their marriage, assuming theirs was a union unshakable by temptation. But behind Nathaniel's carefully polished image was a gnawing dissatisfaction he could not articulate. He craved something new, something thrilling. Though he couldn't explain why his heart grew restless when Clara gave him everything she had. This restlessness was the seed of his downfall, though Nathaniel, blinded by arrogance, mistook it for destiny. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Nathaniel was sent to a corporate seminar where he first laid eyes on Isabella, a striking young woman who exuded confidence with every word she spoke. Unlike Clara's gentle kindness, Isabella's sharp wit and flirtatious smiles ignited a hunger Nathaniel had buried under years of routine. She laughed at his jokes, leaned in close as though no one else existed, and whispered promises of adventure. In that moment, Clara's devotion seemed pale in comparison to the intoxicating energy radiating from Isabella. Nathaniel convinced himself this attraction was fate, not folly. He believed he deserved more than stability, he deserved passion. That night, while Clara served him dinner and asked about his day, he answered mechanically, his thoughts already far away, tangled in the web Isabella had begun to weave. Weeks turned into months, and Nathaniel's business meetings became more frequent. Clara trusted him implicitly, never questioning the late nights or the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. Isabella knew exactly how to keep him hooked, sometimes affectionate, other times distant, always leaving him yearning for more. She spoke of dreams, of travel, of a life that was vibrant and free from routine. Nathaniel, consumed by his lust for change, began to view Clara as an anchor dragging him down. He no longer saw her sacrifices, her quiet strength, or the countless ways she nurtured their bond. Instead, he fantasized about breaking free, imagining himself by Isabella's side, living in reckless passion. The betrayal was not yet complete, but the decision was already brewing in his heart. One evening, Clara found Nathaniel sitting in silence, staring at a half-empty glass of whiskey. His eyes were clouded, his words distant. When she asked what troubled him, he snapped, accusing her of smothering him with her constant care. Her heart sank, for she had always thought her love was his strength. That night marked the first time Nathaniel vocalized the resentment Isabella had been feeding. Within days he confessed to Clara, not in shame but with cold resolve, that he had found someone who made him feel alive. Clara's world shattered. She begged, she wept. She reminded him of their vows, but Nathaniel had already made up his mind. He packed his bags, abandoning years of loyalty for a fantasy he could not resist. At first, life with Isabella seemed like the paradise Nathaniel had dreamed of. She filled his days with laughter, daring escapades, and late-night promises whispered against his ear. Friends distanced themselves, uneasy with the way he had discarded Clara so heartlessly, but Nathaniel brushed it off. He convinced himself he was reborn, that he had escaped the chains of monotony. Clara's face haunted him occasionally in dreams, her tearful eyes, her trembling voice, but he suppressed those memories with passion and wine. He thought he had won, a new life, a new love, and the freedom to chase desire, but Nathaniel had yet to learn the oldest truth of betrayal, that those who betray are often betrayed in turn, and when that moment came it would dismantle everything he had left. Paradise first cracked in places Nathaniel refused to look. Isabella's charm had edges, sharp little rules disguised as affection. She hated secrets, so she suggested he share his phone passcode. She loved transparency, so she asked for a joint card just for groceries, which somehow funded rooftop bars, designer shoes, and spontaneous weekends that left his savings thin and his conscience thinner. When colleagues invited couples to a quiet dinner, Isabella declined, insisting their love didn't need boring people with boring lives. Nathaniel repeated her line at work and felt privately the sting of isolation. Nights grew louder, mornings more fragile. He gulped coffee to mute the tremors of fatigue and the whisper of guilt repeating Clara's name. Each time it surfaced, Isabella's laughter smothered it, until the laughter demanded repayment. She wanted a new apartment with a skyline view, and a lease in both their names, a declaration to the world that this was not a fling but a coronation. He signed because he wanted the music to keep playing, yet when the elevator doors closed on their glittering floor, and he caught his reflection, drawn eyes, a mouth pinched in uncertainty, he remembered the man who once came home to a porch light and steady warmth. He told himself he was free. The truth was simpler. He was in too deep to admit he was sinking. Clara's grief did not make a spectacle of itself. It moved through the house in quiet ways, folding shirts that no longer needed folding, watering a basil plant that had turned bitter, opening the closet and closing it without reason. She slept on the far edge of the bed as if grief were a person who needed space. But silence is not surrender. Within weeks she boxed the memories that hurt most and left them in the attic like winter coats. Not forgotten, simply not for every day. She returned to the library where she worked and took on an archival project no one wanted. Dust, deadlines, and the patience of a monk. Her supervisor noticed the steadiness that had always been there but had, until now, been overshadowed by the idea of a bright future shared with someone else. Clara stopped checking her phone at midnight. She stopped rehearsing conversations she would never have. When an old friend, Layla, invited her to a weekend workshop on restorative journaling, Clara went, expecting nothing and finding a small miracle. Strangers who spoke their pain like weather reports, unashamed and precise. She wrote a single sentence that felt like stepping through a door. I was not left because I was small, I was left because he was hollow. The words did not erase the ache, but they rearranged it into something she could carry without bleeding. Her kindness hardened into boundaries. The ring went into a velvet pouch. She began, slowly, to belong to herself again. The Skyline apartment shimmered at sunset, all glass and angles, a trophy case for a love story that required constant applause. Isabella choreographed their life like a director. The right photos, the right parties, the right acquaintances whose names were passwords to rooms Nathaniel had never entered before. She introduced him to a circle of beautifully restless people who spoke in deals and promises, where the currency was attention and the interest rate was envy. Champagne lingered on his tongue while anxiety nested behind his ribs. The joint card always seemed to be maxed. The temporary loan from his investment account stretched into something permanent. The whispers about a boutique startup Isabella wanted to launch became a pitch delivered with those eyes that had once felt like rescue. She asked him to invest just enough to show faith. He did, not because the numbers made sense, but because the alternative, saying no, risked unmasking the fear that she might vanish the moment the music stopped. He called this devotion. It was management of a crisis he couldn't name. The more he gave, the more the edges of his old life dissolved. Friends, already scarce, retreated into polite distance. When he mentioned Clara, Isabella's smile cooled and a new rule surfaced, crisp as a contract. No ghosts at our table, he laughed on cue. Yet at night, with the city humming like a machine, Nathaniel felt the bars of the golden cage. They were transparent, yes, but unyielding. At a client gala held in a museum of modern art, rooms of mirrors pretending to be windows, Nathaniel watched Isabella meet Adrian Vale, a financier whose voice could buy silence, and whose watch seemed to measure time in other people's hours. Adrian praised Isabella's entrepreneurial instinct in a tone that felt less like recognition and more like acquisition. She brightened, the way she had brightened for Nathaniel at that seminar months ago. The same tilt of the head, the same conspiratorial lean. He told himself he was imagining the echo. Yet when Adrian asked about the startup, Isabella's words poured like honey over a diagram she had once sketched on napkins for Nathaniel. It sounded slicker now, sharper, as if someone had edited out the hope and circled the profit margins in permanent ink. On the ride home, Isabella was buoyant, phone buzzing with new contacts, eyes lit with possibility. She spoke of partnerships and accelerators, and a strategic advisory role Adrian might play. Nathaniel, who had been paying the invoices without complaint, felt like a chair moved to a different corner of the room. Still present, no longer essential. That night he scrolled through their photos and noticed how often he was cropped by the frame of her smile. The next morning he forgot an internal deadline, and the reprimand from his manager landed too easily, as if gravity had been waiting. He told himself focus would return. It didn't. The mirror rooms had followed him home. The discovery was not cinematic. It was arithmetic. 2 late nights, 3 canceled dinners, 1 low battery excuse that didn't match the timestamps on her social posts. Nathaniel was not looking to catch her. Guilt makes poor detectives. But the numbers arranged themselves anyway. A ride-share receipt from a neighborhood they never visited. A photo tagged by a mutual acquaintance. Isabella laughing on a terrace lit with lanterns. Adrian's hand not on her but near enough to suggest future permissions. The confrontation unfolded in their kitchen, light falling across the marble like a spotlight too honest to ignore. Isabella's defense was nimble. He was paranoid. She had told him about the meeting. Why did he insist on bringing ghosts to the table? The conversation became a hall of mirrors where his questions returned as accusations against his character. He apologized for his tone. She forgave him for his imagination. They embraced, and he felt something missing that had not been missing before, as if the lock had learned an extra click he did not possess the key for. That night, sleep came and left quickly, and in the gray before dawn he understood a thing he had refused to name. The story he had used to justify leaving Clara was the same script being rehearsed without him now. He had mistaken the echo for music. He had mistaken repetition for destiny. Somewhere across the city, a lantern swung on a terrace, and he knew, finally, that wind could be a warning. Nathaniel began to notice Isabella's absence in ways that stung sharper than any argument. She no longer called him darling with that lilting tone, no longer leaned against him during their rooftop evenings. Instead, her phone buzzed endlessly, and her eyes lit up only when reading names that weren't his. When he asked, she dismissed his questions as insecurity. He wanted to believe her, but the silence between them stretched like unspoken verdicts. Bills piled higher. His paycheck, once stable, seemed insufficient for the lifestyle she demanded. At work, whispers floated. His performance had dipped, his focus fractured. Yet Nathaniel clung desperately, telling himself love was sacrifice, and sacrifice proved worth. Deep down he knew he was repeating Clara's words, only now in reverse. The irony cut deeper than any blade. Isabella began spending nights at strategy sessions, leaving lipstick-stained glasses in the sink that didn't match the shade she owned before. Nathaniel told himself trust was stronger than suspicion, but trust had been gutted long ago. Every smile from her felt rehearsed, every kiss a contract nearing expiration. And though he couldn't yet admit it aloud, Nathaniel had become the ghost at his own table. The truth arrived uninvited. Nathaniel left work early one Friday, the weight of anxiety pressing harder than deadlines. When he entered the apartment, he heard laughter, Isabella's, rich and sparkling, but it wasn't directed at him. On the balcony stood Isabella and Adrian, glasses raised, bodies leaning together in a way that banished doubt. Adrian's hand brushed her waist. She didn't flinch. Nathaniel froze, watching betrayal unfold in real time. The very betrayal he had once delivered to Clara. His throat burned, his chest constricted, but rage never fully bloomed. What he felt was something colder, recognition. When they noticed him, Isabella didn't gasp or stumble. She sighed, as though his presence were an inconvenience. "You weren't supposed to be here yet," she said flatly. Adrian's smirk cut through the silence. Nathaniel tried to speak, but words scattered like ash. In that moment he realized the game had ended long before he noticed the rules. Isabella wasn't sorry, nor did she bother with denial. She had simply outgrown him, the way he once claimed to outgrow Clara. The cycle was complete, and now he stood on the receiving end, stripped of excuses, dignity unraveling like thread pulled loose. Days blurred into one another, each carrying the sting of humiliation. Isabella moved out with little explanation, leaving behind only debts, bills, and a hollow apartment echoing with absence. Adrian's shadow lingered everywhere. In unpaid invoices, in Isabella's last dismissive message, in the smug silence of her new social media posts that flaunted luxury Nathaniel could no longer afford. His colleagues whispered openly now. His boss called him in, and the words performance issues hung heavy in the sterile office. He had gambled everything. Home, stability, reputation, for a dream that evaporated the moment it was tested. The bank called regarding overdue payments. Collectors followed, voices firm and uncompromising. Nathaniel realized too late that he had not only lost a wife and a lover, but the very foundation of his life. Clara, though absent from his world, lingered in memory, her steady love, her loyalty. He saw it now for what it was, the treasure he discarded for fool's gold. Alone in his apartment, Nathaniel stared at the city lights that once promised him adventure. They mocked him instead, glittering reminders of the life he could not hold. The walls whispered his truth. He had betrayed, and in turn he was betrayed. Regret seeped into Nathaniel's bones, unrelenting. He replayed every moment with Clara. The way she placed her hand on his shoulder during storms, the meals she made when he came home exhausted, the quiet faith she carried in their marriage, all of it gone by his own hand. He tried to reach her once, drafting an email filled with apologies, but the words read like excuses, and he deleted them. He drove by their old home, watching from the street as warm light glowed through curtains no longer welcoming him. A car he didn't recognize sat in the driveway, sparking the possibility that Clara's life had moved on, healed in ways his never could. That thought carved deeper than betrayal itself. Regret was no longer a visitor, it became his only companion. Sleep eluded him, and when it came, dreams replayed Clara's tears, Isabella's laughter, Adrian's smirk. he was haunted by the chorus of his own decisions. Regret offered no comfort, no redemption. It only reminded him that once he had everything a man could ask for, and he had thrown it away chasing an illusion. Now he was the illusion, drifting in shadows, his name forgotten in homes that once echoed it warmly. Nathaniel's social world shrank to nothing. Invitations ceased, colleagues kept conversations brief, and even family distanced themselves. No one wanted to associate with a man marked by scandal and ruin. His apartment grew cold, both literally and figuratively, as unpaid bills threatened to cut off utilities. Nights stretched longer, filled with silence broken only by his restless pacing. Loneliness weighed heavier than debt, crushing him with reminders of what he had squandered. The city outside bustled with life, but inside Nathaniel lived in exile. He tried to distract himself with television, with books, with anything. But every narrative seemed to reflect his own downfall, every character a mirror of betrayal. He thought of calling Isabella, demanding answers, but pride and futility kept him silent. He was not her lover anymore. He was her discarded stepping stone. Alcohol became his solace, each glass blurring the edges of pain but sharpening the truth. He had chosen this path. Betrayal was not an accident. It was a seed he planted, watered, and watched bloom into poison. Now he reaped the harvest alone. The once proud man who chased passion stood hollow, swallowed by the consequences of his own choices. While Nathaniel descended, Clara blossomed quietly. She continued her journaling, transforming pain into words of power. She enrolled in courses expanding her career opportunities. Her supervisor promoted her, recognizing resilience forged through fire. Friends gathered around her, filling her evenings with warmth and laughter. She allowed herself to explore companionship again, though cautiously. One evening, Layla introduced her to Daniel, a kind man with patient eyes. Their conversations flowed easily, absent of pressure or pretense. Clara felt hesitant, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by betrayal. She did not hate Nathaniel. Hatred would give him too much space in her heart. Instead, she pitied him. A man trapped by his own flaws, her life was proof that betrayal need not define the betrayed. Strength could rise from ashes, love could rebuild in new forms. Clara's story became one of quiet victory, a contrast to the ruin Nathaniel carved for himself. Where he collapsed, she rebuilt. Where he lost, she discovered. Karma had balanced the scales not with vengeance but with justice. Clara had been freed by his betrayal, and she walked into her future unchained. One cold evening Nathaniel finally broke. Desperation drove him to call Clara. His voice trembled as he begged for forgiveness, for a second chance, for anything that could anchor him to the life he destroyed. Clara listened in silence, her heart steady. When he finished, she spoke gently but firmly. "I loved you, Nathaniel, truly. But love can't survive betrayal, not when it's been trampled. I've healed, and I can't reopen wounds just because you're bleeding now." Her words were not cruel, they were final. Nathaniel sobbed, realizing he was not only losing her again, but losing the last hope of redemption. Clara hung up, tears in her eyes, but relief in her heart. Nathaniel stared at the phone long after, gripping it like a lifeline that had been severed. In that moment he understood that karma wasn't just punishment, it was clarity delivered too late. He had gambled everything on passion, and lost not just love, but himself. Clara had moved on. He remained stuck in the ruins of his own making. It was the last plea, and it echoed unanswered. Consequences crowded in like creditors at the door. Nathaniel's firm terminated his contract, citing unsatisfactory performance. His savings evaporated under the weight of Isabella's debts. The apartment was reclaimed by the bank, and he was forced into a dingy rental far from the skyline he once admired. His health declined, stress and alcohol carving him into a shadow of his former self. Yet the cruelest consequence was not financial ruin but the mirror. Each morning he saw a face aged beyond its years, a man hollowed by regret. He tried to chase distractions, but every attempt brought him back to the same truth. He had betrayed, and betrayal had come for him in equal measure. No excuses remained, no illusions to cling to. He was the architect of his own downfall. Karma had not struck suddenly. It had unfolded like a patient storm, gathering force until it consumed him entirely. Nathaniel finally grasped the inevitability of it. Choices were not accidents, they were seeds, and the harvest always came. Alone in his cramped room, Nathaniel sat with silence, confronting the truth he had evaded for years. Betrayal did not begin with Isabella. It began the moment he looked at Clara's devotion and deemed it insufficient. It began when he mistook loyalty for monotony and passion for permanence. He realized he had never truly loved Isabella. He loved the way she made him feel, important, desired, alive. But those were not love, they were illusions. True love had been Clara's steady presence, the very thing he discarded. Now he saw that betrayal was not a single act but a cycle, one he had set in motion, and one that had returned to consume him. There would be no grand redemption, no miraculous reunion. There was only the lesson etched into his soul. That love betrayed is love forever lost, and no amount of regret can rebuild what arrogance destroyed. His final realization was not victory, but acceptance. He had chosen this path, and he would walk it alone. Nathaniel's story ended not with noise but with silence. Clara thrived, moving forward into a life rebuilt on strength and trust. Isabella moved on as well, chasing her ambitions with Adrian or whoever came next. Nathaniel remained the cautionary tale, a man undone by his own choices. His downfall was not dramatic, it was inevitable, slow, grinding, merciless. He became invisible, a shadow in the city he once thought he could conquer. The cycle of betrayal had completed itself. He betrayed and was betrayed. He abandoned and was abandoned. He destroyed and was destroyed. And in that truth lay the final irony. Karma had not punished him cruelly. It had only reflected his own actions back at him, magnified until he could no longer look away. His story is a warning, a testament to the cost of arrogance and the weight of disloyalty. To those who hear it, remember, betrayal is a mirror. Whatever you give, you will one day face. If you found this story powerful, subscribe for more tales of downfall, karma, and redemption, because the next lesson may be the one you need most.